All right, today we're going to dig into a really counterintuitive idea in economics. The concept that sometimes, just sometimes, a monopoly is actually the best, most efficient way to run things. So how in the world can having only one company in charge actually be a good thing? Let's get into it.
When you hear the word monopoly, your mind probably jumps to some evil, mustache-twirling villain from a board game, right? Someone crushing the little guy and cranking up prices. And look, a lot of the time, that stereotype is spot on. But what if I told you that some monopolies aren't just okay? What if they're actually natural?
To really get our heads around this, we need to strip it all back to the core idea. So let's break down exactly what a natural monopoly is. At its heart, it's all about cost. A natural monopoly happens when one single company can serve an entire market way cheaper than if you had 2 or 3 or 10 companies all trying to do the same thing. It's just a matter of pure economic efficiency. But how is that even possible? Well, the secret ingredient here is a concept called economies of scale. Now, that sounds a little academic, but the idea is super simple. The more of something you make, the cheaper it gets to make each individual one. As your output goes up, your average cost per unit goes down. This simple principle is the engine that powers the whole idea of a natural monopoly. So, what creates these powerful economies of scale? Well, it almost always comes down to one big thing: incredibly high upfront costs. What economists call fixed costs. And there is no better real-world example of this than our own electricity grid.
Just think about it for a second. Before an electric company can sell you a single watt of power, they have to spend billions, literally billions of dollars, building massive power plants, installing gigantic turbines, laying thousands of miles of transmission lines, building substations. All of that has to happen first. And those costs are fixed. They don't change whether they power one single home or a million of them.
To make this crystal clear, let's just use a really simple number. Imagine the fixed cost to build and run a tiny power facility is just $100. Okay, now let's watch the magic happen. If that facility only produces 1 kilowatt of power, that single unit has to cover the entire $100 cost, so the cost per unit is $100. But if that same facility cranks out 5 kilowatts, well, now you're spreading that same $100 cost across 5 units. All of a sudden, the fixed cost per unit plummets down to just $20. That is economies of scale in action. So this is where it gets really interesting in the real world. Let's imagine a showdown. One giant power company going head-to-head with several smaller competitors. If you try to create competition by breaking up that one big company into 3 smaller ones, you don't get rid of those massive fixed costs. In fact, you just multiplied them by 3. Now you've got 3 different companies building power plants, laying their own power lines. It's a hugely wasteful duplication of infrastructure. And since each firm is smaller, their average cost per kilowatt is going to be much higher than the single big firm.
And here's the direct result for you and me. If we try to force competition into a market that is a natural monopoly, the outcome is just plain inefficiency. The costs go up for the companies, and guess where those costs go? Straight to us. We, the consumers, end up paying more, not less.
Now, this isn't just some abstract theory about electricity. This economic pattern pops up in a lot of essential services that we use every single day. Seriously, can you imagine the chaos if 3 different water companies were constantly digging up your street to lay 3 separate sets of pipes? Or running 3 competing natural gas lines to every house? It would be a nightmare. The exact same logic applies to things like local broadband, where laying all that fiber optic cable is the massive, huge, upfront cost. The common thread that ties all of these industries together is that building out the basic infrastructure is just incredibly expensive. And duplicating it is not just inefficient, it's flat out wasteful. The cost structure itself just naturally prefers a single provider. Okay, so let's pull all of this together. What's the big takeaway? What's the actual recipe that creates a natural monopoly? It really just boils down to this. First, you start with those ridiculously high fixed costs. Second, the cost to add just one more customer, what economists call the marginal cost, is pretty low. Right? Once the power grid is built, lighting up one more house costs next to nothing. Those 2 things combined mean your average cost just keeps falling the more people you serve, which leads to the final step: one firm can simply do the job for the whole market at the lowest possible cost. And this is maybe the most important thing to remember. A natural monopoly exists because it is the most efficient outcome. It pops up because of the basic math of the industry, not because some company was being sneaky or ruthless and crushed all its competitors.
But this leaves us with one last really big question. If these monopolies are so efficient, so natural, then why do we almost always see governments stepping in to regulate them? I mean, think about it. With no competition, what's to stop them from charging whatever they want? Now that is a puzzle for another day.